The Old Man They Misjudged, a story of loss, resilience, and redemption. It was one of those blistering summer days when the air hung heavy and time seemed to slow down. On a quiet suburban street, nestled among modest houses with neat yards and white picket fences, stood one property that didn't match the rest. The house at the end of the street was old and weather-beaten, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. Its yard was cluttered with what the neighbors considered junk: empty bottles, rusted cans, and other discarded items stacked neatly along the fence line. This was Harold Evans' home. At 62 years old, Harold was a man who seemed invisible to most. He lived alone, rarely spoke to anyone, and went about his daily routine with a quiet determination. To the neighborhood, he was nothing more than the old man with the messy yard. Children whispered rumors about him being a recluse, while adults speculated that he was an eccentric hoarder. Nobody really knew who Harold was or cared to find out. Across the street lived the Evans family: Mike, his wife Sarah, and their 11-year-old son Ethan. They were well-liked in the neighborhood and often hosted gatherings. Their house stood in stark contrast to Harold's, with its freshly painted shutters and a meticulously maintained garden. To Ethan, however, Harold was more than just the old man everyone ignored. Ethan had always been curious about Harold, about why he lived the way he did, and what stories might lie behind his quiet demeanor. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, Sarah glanced out the window and shook her head. "Look at him," she said, pointing toward Harold's yard. "Why does he keep all that junk? It's such an eyesore." Mike shrugged, barely looking up from his plate. "Who knows? He's probably just a hoarder," he said dismissively. "You shouldn't bother with him, Ethan," Sarah added. "He's not the kind of person you should be spending time with." But Ethan wasn't convinced. From his bedroom window, he often watched Harold working in his yard, carefully arranging his collection of bottles and cans. There was something about the old man that intrigued him. Ethan didn't see a recluse or a hoarder. He saw someone who seemed lonely but content. Someone who carried a quiet sadness that no one else seemed to notice. The following weekend, the Evans family hosted a barbecue to celebrate Mike's brother Nathan's 40th birthday. The backyard was alive with laughter and chatter as neighbors mingled and children played. Everyone on the street had been invited, everyone except Harold. "Why would we invite him?" Sarah had said when Ethan suggested it. He wouldn't come anyway. As the party continued, Ethan noticed Harold sitting in his yard under the shade of an old oak tree. The man was strumming a guitar, his fingers moving effortlessly across the strings. The melody was soft, haunting, and strangely beautiful, a stark contrast to the cheerful noise of the party. For a moment, Ethan felt a pang of sadness for Harold, sitting alone while the rest of the neighborhood celebrated together. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the backyard was quiet, Ethan made a decision. He would talk to Harold. Summoning his courage, he walked across the street and stood at the edge of Harold's yard. "Mr. Evans," he called hesitantly. Harold looked up, his eyes kind but surprised. "Well, hello there," he said, setting his guitar down. "What brings you here, young man?" Ethan hesitated, unsure of what to say. Finally, he blurted out, "Why do you collect bottles?" Harold chuckled, a deep, gravelly sound that held no trace of bitterness. "Each one has a story," he said. "They might look like trash to most people, but to me, they're memories." Ethan frowned, not quite understanding, but he nodded politely. Before he could ask more, his father's voice called from across the street. "Ethan, come home. Don't bother him." Reluctantly, Ethan said goodbye and ran back to his house. But that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about Harold's words. What kind of stories could bottles hold? And what kind of life had Harold lived to see them as treasures? The days turned into weeks, and life in the neighborhood went on as usual. The neighbors continued to gossip about Harold, laughing as they tossed trash into his yard for their amusement. Harold never complained or retaliated. He simply cleaned up the mess with quiet resolve. Ethan watched from his window, a growing sense of guilt gnawing at him. He wanted to understand Harold, to uncover the stories behind the bottles and the man who kept them. One day, while browsing through the local library, Ethan stumbled upon an old newspaper clipping. It featured a photo of a younger Harold in a firefighter's uniform, smiling proudly as he held a child in his arms. The headline read, Heroic firefighter saves family from blaze. Ethan's heart raced as he read the article. Harold had been a decorated firefighter, known for his bravery and selflessness. But the story also revealed a tragedy. Years ago, a fire had claimed the lives of Harold's wife and 2 children. Devastated by the loss, Harold had retired and moved to the quiet neighborhood, where he lived in solitude, haunted by memories of the family he couldn't save. Ethan ran home, clutching the article, and showed it to his parents. They read it in stunned silence. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and Mike looked away, ashamed. "We've been so wrong about him," Sarah whispered. "How could we have treated him like that?" That evening, an ambulance arrived at Harold's house, its flashing lights illuminating the quiet street. Harold had fallen and hit his head, but managed to call for help. The neighbors gathered outside, watching as paramedics loaded Harold onto a stretcher. For the first time, they saw him not as an odd recluse, but as a vulnerable man who had endured unimaginable pain. When Harold returned from the hospital, he found his yard clean and his neighbors waiting for him. Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Mr. Evans, we're so sorry for how we've treated you. We didn't know." Harold looked at her, his weathered face softening. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Sometimes people judge what they don't understand." Ethan ran up to Harold and hugged him tightly. "I read about you," he said. "You're a hero." Harold smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to erase years of loneliness. "Thank you, kid," he said, patting Ethan's back. From that day on, Harold became an integral part of the community. He shared stories of his firefighting days, taught Ethan to play the guitar, and even joined the neighborhood barbecues. His yard, once a symbol of isolation, became a gathering place filled with laughter and music. The bottles he collected were no longer a source of ridicule, but a reminder of the resilience and strength that defined his life. As time passed, Harold's story inspired the neighbors to look beyond appearances and embrace compassion. They began to see him not as the old man with the messy yard, but as a symbol of quiet courage and unyielding love. And in return, Harold found a sense of belonging he had long thought lost. A lesson for us all. Harold's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy and the dangers of making assumptions about others. Behind Harold's quiet demeanor was a man who had faced immense loss and still found the strength to carry on. His ability to forgive those who had wronged him speaks to the transformative power of kindness and understanding. This story also reminds us that everyone carries unseen burdens. A little compassion and an open heart can create ripples of change in ways we may never fully understand. If Harold's story moved you, there are many more tales waiting to be told. Stories of resilience, compassion, and the unyielding human spirit. Join our journey. If Harold's story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to Life Stories 365, where we share meaningful stories that celebrate the beauty and strength of the human spirit. By subscribing, liking, and sharing our videos, you help us spread the message of kindness and understanding to a world that desperately needs it. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring tale. Let's grow together as a community that values connection, compassion, and the power of storytelling. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.